The mortality of men was a gift, though to most mortals it almost seemed ironic. For how could death be a gift when they would have to leave so many things and loved ones behind? And so, men began to fear and hate their mortality, and they grew jealous of the immortality of the elves. And some of these men would even desire to live in the Undying Lands and to forsake their gift altogether. Yet none of these desires could ever come to fruition, for men were banned from travelling to the Undying Lands, and if they managed to somehow find a way to live in these lands, a terrible fate would await them. So after Morgoth's defeat at the end of the First Age, the Valar lifted up the island of Númenor from the sea as a reward for the men that were loyal to them. These Númenorians were also blessed with a lifespan that was 3 times that of lesser men, and through their longer lives, the Númenorians excelled in arts, law, and wisdom. Yet their longevity also had a dark side to it, for it gave them a more possessive attitude, and the Númenorians began to desire the enjoyment of their earthly possessions and lives above all else. This was why Eru Ilúvatar, the god of Ea, had instructed the Valar to ban the Númenorians from sailing to the Undying Lands, for he knew that if mortals had to reach these lands, they would grow jealous of the elves and their immortality, as they craved everlasting life, and they would disregard their own gift. It's tragic that, in their pursuit of immortality, these men would end up wasting their lives trying to chase something that they could never have. For the Undying Lands weren't some magical place that made people immortal, but they were in fact named this way because of the immortal elves and Ainur that lived there. And so, even if men could somehow reach these lands, they would still remain mortal. Their mortality would actually seem like a more terrible burden, for the creatures and nature of the Undying Lands were special, and they aged and grew at an extremely slow rate. And according to Tolkien, men would be the most short-lived creatures in those lands. As these men grew older, they would start to notice how all the other living creatures in the Undying Lands hardly seemed to change, as they flourished in the hope of endless years undimmed, and this would fill men with envy, for they would feel that they were victims of injustice by being denied the gifts and blessings that were given to all the other living things in this land. To quote, "Men would feel that they were the least and most despised of all creatures. He would not value what he had, but feeling that he was among the least and most despised of all creatures, he would grow soon to contempt his own manhood, and to hate those more richly endowed. He would not escape the fear and sorrow of his swift mortality that is his lot upon earth in Arda Mard, but would be burdened by it unbearably, to the loss of all delight." This shows us that if men had to live in the Undying Lands, they would eventually lose all of their joy in life. For while they were surrounded by the immortal elves, Ainur, and nature, their own short lives would seem even more fleeting, while their mortality became a much greater burden, and they would end up hating the gift of men more, rather than accepting it. The messengers of Manwë would even mention this to the Númenorians when they tried to explain why these men couldn't live in Aman. They told them that there you would but wither and grow weary the sooner, as moths in a light too strong and steadfast. Now, most of this information that we've discussed comes from Tolkien's essay called Aman and Mortal Men, from the book Morgoth's Ring. And we'd like to explore this essay further, for in our opinion, it's by far one of Tolkien's most interesting writings on the mortality of men. So in this essay, Tolkien explores a very interesting hypothetical situation. What would happen if the bodies of men were somehow blessed with longevity, which would stop the aging process? Would they be able to enjoy immortality, and would their lives be similar to those of the elves? So immortality wasn't the only difference that separated elves and men, but their very nature and fate were also quite distinct. For the elven spirits, or Fëa, were bound to the world of Arda, while the spirits of men were destined to leave the confines of the world forever. This is why the elven spirit was made to endure the world up until its end, and why their body was also immortal in nature, for it had to remain strong enough to support the elven spirit for all these years. Since the lands of Middle-earth were tainted by Morgoth's corruption, they would slowly weaken the elven bodies over thousands of years, and this is why the elves would eventually grow tired of Middle-earth, and why they chose to sail to the Undying Lands. For these lands were free from Morgoth's corruption, and so the elven body would also be free from this weakness while living there. Now, in the case of men, even if their body could somehow be made immortal, the nature of their spirit could never be changed, for its fate was to leave the world and not to remain confined to it for long. And so, according to Tolkien, if men were immortal, their spirit and body would eventually end up conflicted and opposed to one another, for they would no longer be united and at peace, and they would suffer together. They would want different things, for through its immortality, the body of men would be full of strength and the joy of life, and it would desperately try to cling onto the spirit. For the man's body would end up dying if the spirit had to somehow leave it. Tolkien wrote that against death it would revolt, as would a great beast in full life either flee from the hunter or turn savagely upon him. Now, just like the man's body, his spirit would also be suffering greatly, for it would feel imprisoned while it longed to leave the world of Arda, and this feeling would keep growing until all of its senses became meaningless. It would grow more and more tired of all physical delights until it eventually hated them all. To quote, "The man would not be blessed, but accursed, and he would curse the Valar and Aman and all the things of Arda, and he would not willingly leave Aman, for that would mean rapid death, and he would have to be thrust forth with violence." This was a terrible fate, and it sounds truly agonizing, though this rapid death was preferable to the fate that awaited man if he somehow managed to remain in the Undying Lands despite this inner conflict. For we know that this battle between his spirit and his body would eventually have to come to an end, and one or the other would have to be the victor. If the man's body managed to dominate his spirit, he would end up becoming like a tormented beast, while if his spirit was stronger, then one of two things could occur. It could either leave the body in hatred, which would cause a sudden, violent, and agonizing death, even though the body was in perfect health moments prior, or it could abandon the body without pity, and so the body would be left like a witless, empty vessel. To quote Tolkien, this vessel would be not even a beast, but a monster, a very work of Melkor in the midst of Aman, which the Valar themselves would fain destroy. Luckily, men would never have to experience these fates and conflicts, since their bodies weren't immortal. And it's a pity that they couldn't appreciate how terrible this inner conflict would be when they desired immortality. After all, it was because of those foolish desires that the Númenóreans tried to attack the Undying Lands in the hopes of claiming immortality, and they ended up losing their civilization in the process. For after their attack, Eru Ilúvatar sunk their island beneath the sea, and he changed the face of the world forever by removing the Undying Lands from the curvature of the world. Only the elves were able to reach the Undying Lands now, by setting sail in ships that were specially made and blessed for this voyage, and by following the mysterious straight road, they would somehow go beyond the curvature of the physical world to reach the land of Aman. In some very rare, exceptional cases, some mortals that played a great part in elvish affairs were allowed to travel aboard these ships to the Undying Lands. though it seems that they would have to stay on the island of Tol Eressëa, to the east of Aman. Their numbers included Frodo, Bilbo, Sam, and Gimli, and their time in the Undying Lands was limited, for they would eventually die a natural death from old age. Though while they were there, they would be able to enjoy a period of peace, reflection, and healing that was greater than anything they could have achieved had they remained in Middle-earth. Now, what's really interesting is that Morgoth was the main reason behind man's fear of death, for his influence corrupted and twisted the way they saw and valued this gift, while making it seem like a curse. And so it's interesting to wonder, would men be able to live happily in the Undying Lands without growing jealous of the elves' immortality if Morgoth had never managed to corrupt them? We believe that the intrinsic nature of men wouldn't suit or complement a life in the Undying Lands. And if men had to coexist with the elves in these lands, one of these two races would end up unhappier, for it was in the nature of men to shape and change their surroundings and the order of things to mould their destiny. And if they followed this nature in the Undying Lands, it would have probably affected the elves in a negative way. For the elves appreciated the unchanging nature of the Undying Lands, and the way things were preserved there unscarred from the passage of time, and they would end up losing part of this if men changed this land significantly. On the other hand, men would probably end up restless if they somehow managed to suppress their nature, and we can't see them being happy for long if they had to live in these unchanging lands. So this wraps up today's video, and we hope you enjoyed it. We know that can be quite a heavy topic, so if you'd like us to clarify anything, just leave a comment below. We'd also like to hear your thoughts on this subject. Do you feel sympathetic towards the race of men and their desire for immortality? And would you have preferred the gifts of men or those of the elves? And do you think it was unfair that men had no choice but to fend off evil in the war-torn lands of Middle-earth, while the elves still had a peaceful land where they could escape to? As always, we'd like to give a quick shout-out to all the patrons that choose to support this channel. Your help makes this channel possible, and your support is deeply appreciated. Particularly the Valar tier patrons, Jacob Williams, Michael Angel, and T. Gorman, and the Wizard tier patrons, James Stodgel, Andrew Burma, Mike Feeney, Roland Meervold, and Tamar Baines. If you too would like to help and support this channel while unlocking some cool perks, we'll be leaving a link to the Patreon page in the video description. You could also support this channel by checking out our store and by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and joining our Discord server. All of these links can be found in the video description. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to join our fellowship today. Until next time, when we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.